I'd now like to welcome Rich Dickens, today's guest presenter. Rich is a long-standing friend and supporter of UnLtd. He has delivered training and support to both our award winners and our award managers. Rich and many of his team also provide mentor support. He is a director of Make It Happen Consultancy and Social Value Business. Make It Happen has supported the growth and ongoing sustainability of over 400 social and ethical businesses. It has also supported the development of over 120 social business startups and assisted their clients in achieving in excess of £10 million worth of finance through grants and loans and over £100 million in contracted and trading income. Social Value Business has over 30 years' experience of measuring and accounting for social impact and value, supporting charities and social enterprises to embed it at the heart of their organisations. It provides a full range of support and development services for organisations that would like to research, analyse, measure, evaluate and showcase their social impact and value. Rich himself has a wealth of experience within the third and private sectors at operational and strategic levels, managing budgets and organisations with up to £90 million worth of turnover per annum. He has supported the strategic development of Tesco, Sainsbury's, Asda, Waitrose and B&Q, and was employed as an operations director for Momentum UK, the second largest field marketing company in the UK. His clients include 8 leading spin-outs that he supported through business planning and the development of social impact and value measurement frameworks. Rich is considered a leader in the UK for social return on investment assessments, sitting on the Methodology Assurance Board and the International Council for the Development of the Social Return on Investment model. So thank you all for joining us. I'd now like to hand you over to Rich.
Oh, thanks very much. I actually feel quite honoured, and I actually find out that I've actually achieved a lot more than I thought I did, which is fantastic. Welcome everybody. The topic of today is social value, and I'm sure all of you would have heard or related to social value or social impact in many different ways. So hopefully over the next 55 minutes or so, we will dispel quite a lot of myths and rumours, hopefully give you some good nuggets of information. And some of the core things that I'd like to try to help you with really is trying to reduce some of the anxiety and the stress about measuring value and impact, regardless of size of your organisation. Big organisations have very similar challenges as small. Actually, and sometimes small organisations can actually achieve more quicker and therefore be easier to measure. So we have a number of slides today, and all of which will be available through Julie at the end of the session. Any questions, naturally, I will be more than happy to answer. And also anything I refer to in any sort of documents, etc., I will make sure that I will bob over. So first of all, just kind of touching on social value. It's all about providing and showcasing your impact to a stakeholder. So one of the things today is actually you are my stakeholders. So you are the people listening in. So actually the first slide is a little bit about us actually, but more importantly, it's about understanding if we're legitimate. And that's one of the biggest challenges you as individuals and organisations have. How do you demonstrate that you're legitimate within your field, within your particular expertise, or within a particular service, over and above others? And that's a key. So yes, we've helped generate income, and yes, we've set up a number of different organisations, but it's meaningless unless you can actually prove it. And proving it is actually the challenge. So what we have is a range of influences, and I'm not going to go through all of these. Again, you're going to have these, but 2 or 3 core ones. One is about how people are making different choices. Both commissioners, both organisations and individuals are making choices based on their own individual ethics and values. So we believe more and more that we should purchase locally. We believe more and more that people need to operate in a certain way. Actually, there's a number of different cases, BP being one and Volkswagen at the moment, where the relationships deteriorated through whether something which is against the law or is against a person's ethics and values. And therefore people are choosing to react differently. And that's only come about over the last 3 or 4 years. As we all know, that there is a big influence around the Social Values Act, which basically highlights that public sector organisations should consider both the economic, social and environmental impact of their procurement activities. Now this is only above OJU, which is £176,000 per annum as it stands today. However, there are considerations about that will be lowered. So effectively, if you're looking to tender for a service run by the public sector in some shape or format, you will need to be able to consider and showcase your value. Fortunately, there's no standard. There is no clear definition of what people will ask you to measure. So you have to be clear for yourself what will actually benefit you. And the final aspects here is actually localism. So we're saying about local is important, but the government have actually put on a lot of emphasis on looking local, buying local, and obviously part of the Social Enterprise UK's initiative, Buy Social. So it's far greater influence now. This has started off in 2014, it's moved to 2015 and 16. So it's something which is really in the mindset. So what we have is quite a key aspect to this. So everything we consider has to be related to profit. Profit is not a dirty word. But when I say profit, it's profit for social purpose. So make profit, but it's what you do with that, how you invest that, how you deliver services, how ethics and values within your organisation or as individuals play a part. Obviously, it's about engaging with people, because everything you do is or has a social motive. And that social motive is hopefully going to impact people. And then obviously it's understanding the impact that you actually have. So the model in front of you is actually a very good way of demonstrating why you're different to perhaps private limited companies or other general companies out in the UK today. So profit for social purpose. So this is all about then moving the conversation on. It's moving the conversation on to the terminology. This is really essential because, again, the terminology is confusing. Now, majority of you would or understand social outputs, social outcomes, and that's the vast majority of organisations are. It's the vast majority of what the public sector and funders have asked for in the future. But now what we need to do is move the conversation on. So it's about social outcomes, so what has changed, but what we're now looking at is moving it on to say, what difference has that change made? I.e., I went to the doctors today, for example, and if I went to the doctors and I sought medication, and that medication made me feel better. So the difference it makes is that I can go to the gym today because I don't have pain in my leg, for example. So the difference is where the impact is. The value is what value people place on the difference happening. Again, don't worry about too much about this because it will become more and more relevant as we go on. So social value does not have a universal definition. So it's up to you to define within your organisation. And then the actual worth is financial and non-financial. So public sector value very much about cost savings. Of course they do. But if you're looking to generate fundraising income, well, actually people don't really care so much about saving the public sector. What they care about is affecting local communities or engaging with a particular activity that's important to them. And then the overall process of this lovely world of measurement is social accounting. So it's worth in mind within your organisation so you can start that common dialogue. So when we look at actual value, now there's a number of different areas here, and you don't have to measure all of them, but it's worth understanding what they are. So yes, it's about the financial value, the economic value, the financial benefit. So cost saving, who's saving the money? But if we take the GP example for 2 seconds, a GP visit costs the NHS about £43. But what's more important, £43 cost saving, or is it the time, the 11.7 minutes allocated to an appointment? Because you could argue the doctor still sits there whether you go to the appointment or not. But if that appointment's not needed, then someone else can take the place, someone else who may have a greater need. So sometimes the time and capacity value that you have, the resource value, could be far greater. Then you think about the local side. So the vast majority of socially minded organisations, whether it's social enterprise or charities, have the ability to generate money. And generate money through funding, fundraising, for example. And that money will come into your local area from outside, possibly. So if you're delivering services in Bristol and you get a big lottery grant, that money doesn't come from Bristol, that money comes from the central part located in London. So that's new money into the economy, it's new money into the area which enables you to develop. Look at about the people side. So individuals value things differently, again. So what we have here, it's the change that we have. So if you think about every time we go out and experience something, we have the emotional connection. Then we have the physiological, and then we actually have the physical. So it's feel, act, and do. And that then understands that some people will deliver services which may not have a physical difference. You may just change or help change or encourage people to do things differently. But that's the start of creating value. And without that, other things don't happen. Community and social change, well, that's quite simple. It's basically what's happening in the local community which you are affecting. Dead simple. Trust and transparency, well, actually, do your stakeholders trust you? And that's really important. One, from how you communicate your value going forward, but actually, if you can measure that and understand what that looks like, then you have a far greater possibility of convincing commissioners and funders that you're the right organisations to take on money. And then obviously it's about working in partnership with individuals or organisations. What do you do together? What's the strength of that? How important is that to you? Because actually nowadays people don't want to duplicate products or services. So if you can demonstrate that you're part of a client's journey, a service user's journey, you can demonstrate far greater value. So all those things link into social value. You can take part of it or all of it. It doesn't actually matter at this stage. So how is it created? Quite simply, the flowchart in front of you. You deliver a service, somebody experiences some degree of change. As a result of that change, people do things differently. And as a result of doing things differently, the areas such as health, employment, education, etc. will have some degree of impact. So if I'm healthier, I'm more likely to stay employed or go to work. If I'm more likely to go to work and employed, I'm less likely to be in a position where I can't afford my rent or my mortgage, which has a housing effect and obviously an economic effect. If I decide today that we're doing the webinar and there's a knowledge share, there's a skills and confidence development, there's an educational benefit. So everything you do will have a multiple range of benefits. Just because you may be in the health arena doesn't mean you won't have an impact on justice, for example. So it's considering your wider. And then actually bringing it down and saying, okay, for the purposes of today and the purposes of trying to make it as simple as we can, let's look at the financial value, so cost saving, look at the local and community, so where that cost saving is, looking at the emotional and physical impact, so a personal change a person has, and then looking at the capacity, so resource value. So, stakeholders. First stage of doing anything to do with social value is knowing who your stakeholders are and knowing how you're affected by them and they're affected by you. So what we need to do is consider 3 questions. Very simply, what value do they have through the delivery of what you do? Have you actually ever asked them what they're doing differently? Have you ever asked them what do they value about you as an organisation over others? Now, it's really quite surprising because one of the biggest dangers here is try to measure everything. But if you can ask these key 3 questions, actually you can measure only what's important. And what's important is what your stakeholders value. And that's critical because that will save you about 70% of all the work that you're going to have to put in. So it's really important. So go out and speak to stakeholders, find out. And then there's ways of doing that, which we'll go through a little bit later. But if we consider about 3/5 of people who start measuring their value don't finish because there's too much. So this stage about going out and speaking to stakeholders initially and find out what's important to them and then only measuring against that is absolutely essential. So breaking down stakeholders then. So direct, indirect and wider. So direct stakeholders could be service users, staff, volunteers. Indirect stakeholders could be commissioners, could be family and friends, could be other partners, could be other service providers, it could be internally as well. Wider stakeholders can again take many shapes and sizes, but if you think about actually regulators, the press, UnLtd. So there's lots of people who have an effect on what you do. But we've got to consider that you can't speak to everybody. So if we consider only speaking to the ones which have power and the ones that have urgency. So these are the people who have the effect of either closing you down, taking your money away, or preventing you from doing what you believe or you want to do. And that's quite important because you need to go and speak to the people who engage with your service, i.e. service users. Now ideally that you'll be speaking to 20% of all your service users. And that's quite a few, but you continue until you learn nothing new. So service users will hold you to account. They're the ones who will say you're great or not. They're the ones who will make sure that you retain your contract, or certainly have all the tools and the evidence to give to a commissioner or a funder to retain your contract or grant funding. Now, speaking to the likes of partners, if you can understand how important you are in the chain of events in that person's life, the chain of events in terms of a service user, again, you can understand where to prioritize your time. So if we then consider about mapping people's values, and what I will do is actually send you over some examples of the direct and indirect and wider stakeholder groups, because I appreciate we've only got a short amount of time today. So if we map stakeholder values, asking these key questions, so you go out and speak to them and say, okay, what's important to you? How is it important and why is it important? Not only does it do your research, what you'll get is a range of keywords. And it may be, well, actually, you reduce social isolation. It may be that you engage, you listen, you learn, you give me hope. You may be transparent, you may develop. So all those keywords that you can gather from doing stakeholder engagement will give you the ability to do one important thing. Again, this is critical because what it will enable you to do is 2 things. First of all, it will enable you to understand what and how to measure your value to generate these sources of income. So everything on the top, the 2 top sections, so trading, business to business, or business to an individual, you need to demonstrate the emotional value that you have with an individual. Price they expect, so you've got to do something else. Everyone will sell a product and service, you can argue at a similar price, so you've got to offer more. So we've got to demonstrate local value. Here we've got to demonstrate emotional value. Now commissioning is public sector. They are not so focused on emotional. What they want is cost saving, time saving, and the locality in which it's saved. So again, by going out and finding what people value, we can start to align how we report and how we consider what we're going to do. Now obviously below the two quarters, we've got funding, fundraising. Everyone knows funding, and as you can see, it's more complex. It's more complex because of basically giving away public's money. And then we've got fundraising. Now fundraising can be shaken a tin, but actually it's moved on from that. It's now crowdfunding. It's now corporate sponsorship. It's now impact bonds, community and social investment. So people expect you to have a relationship. So that's the first thing we need to consider. Now the second thing we need to consider is the key areas where you have value. So when you're going out and speaking to people, again, if you're providing health and wellbeing service to the elderly, well actually, why are you not speaking to housing providers, housing associations, private landlords? Because naturally there is an effect that if people are healthier longer, they can stay in their homes longer, and therefore it has an effect. Each of these areas, by the way, very importantly, linking to the JSNA, the Joint Strategic Needs Assessment, affect up a community. And this is great because if you're showcasing your value, this is what you need to do. So the other aspect to knowing what people value is this core aspect here. It's creating social pledges. So you know when I said about trying to measure everything is difficult? Change that. Use what people value about your organisation and pledge to deliver value by creating social pledges. Now social pledges are dead easy. Really, really easy. So a couple of things here. You go out and speak to people, find out what they value, and then you use the keywords, so the top 3 keywords that relate to a particular theme, health, education, employment, justice, and you put it into a commitment or a sentence. For example, we pledge to reduce the need for community intervention within the local area through positive engagement of our elderly people. So it's a very generic statement, but it gives some direction of what you're trying to achieve socially. It may be to reduce the need for urgent and crisis care through providing preventative health and wellbeing services. Again, you can't measure against that, but people start to know what you're trying to achieve, and it starts to give you some direction on how to measure. So here's an example here, quite simple. So the ones I've actually underlined are your key words or key phrase. Now these become also something else a bit stronger. These become your key messages on all your marketing. These become your key messages on all your communication. So when people ask what you do this. And you can start to consider how you can measure it, but it's still quite intangible. So there's another stage to go into. So this is all the preparation. So when I say about marketing messages, everyone's heard of the elevator pitch. So think about being caught in the lovely elevator or lift for 15 seconds and people ask you what you do. You've got some language on what you can start to communicate. Now we do need to make sure, however, they are clear and are not misleading, because we've got to make sure the transparency is all the way for you. And obviously plain English, because we've got to make sure that these are fit for the people who are going to read them. So if we've got a pledge, so a commitment, what we need to be able to do is put them into a measurable format to make sure we can reduce the level of stuff we're measuring. So these are called key value indicators. Now, key value indicators are very simple indeed. They sit alongside a KPI. So if you think about your KPI, your key performance indicators, being purely about business, KVIs are all about your social. So if you're a social enterprise, this is your balance. So what we're trying to do here is create a series of measurable indicators of the value that you will create. And obviously we've got some key areas here. So it is about the impact, it is about the value, it is about the local, it is about working together. So when you look about measuring, what we're doing is saying, okay, we're looking to reduce the health inequalities in Birmingham, no problem. How do we make that is measurable? Well, actually, it's the same way as a KPI. It's the same way of using the lovely terminology, and I do actually hate it, SMART objective. So specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. So, for example, what we've got here is quite clear. So taking the one we had before, we're looking to reduce, because we're not doing anything, putting a number. That could be a percentage or just a number of people who would no longer need urgent care. Now people say to me, how do you come up with a number? Well, actually, everything you do is about that social value and social impact. So surely you can put a range if you can't put a number attached to it. Again, what we need to be able to do is put it so it's time-bound or timelined. So if we're looking to reduce 7.1% of people who will not only engage with preventative service but would otherwise need urgent care, by 2014-15, we've got how much, by when, and how. So what you end up doing is only measuring your success or your value that particular area is created. So what you've done is reduced that 100% of everything you wanted to measure down to 70%. And by doing that, what you've done is measuring what's important. Because what's the point of actually measuring something which isn't important to your stakeholders? And that's your key. And that's why a lot of people start but don't finish. Start and get confused, stressed, or start, complete something which no one reads at the end. So then, and only then, do we consider, once we know what we're going to measure, it's how to measure it. And there are 120 different models here. And there's so many different models, everyone creates their own and coming up with different ideas and concepts and frameworks. But it's really up to you to say, okay, how best do we measure our KVI? And by doing that, you're in a very stronger position because you're selecting what's important. Again, all the way through the theme. So choosing the most suitable approach is going back and saying, okay, by achieving the reduction in urgent care, actually our main stakeholder for that would be NHS, for example. And we know the NHS is valuing cost savings and local. So what we do is actually look on this kind of matrix here and saying, okay, financial saving is social return on investment. We also know the resource saving is quite important, so that again will be social return on investment. And then the local and community side is LM3. So again, these are all acronyms, but they'll become a bit more enlightened later. So what you're doing is, if you're going to measure something, you just as well go through the process and intertwine almost in many ways a couple of different models. Because actually you're asking pretty much the same questions. So why not? It's just how you then report it at the end. So there's always different ways of measuring. So then, okay, so we've got the pre-start, we've got a set of social pledges, we've got a set of KVIs, and we've considered the tools we're going to use. So what we're then looking at, and this is pretty much standard across the board, is input. So input is basically what it costs to run your organisation or the service you're looking to measure. Now that's quite easy because that comes down to financials. But actually it also comes down to the non-financial. What do you get in kind? What volunteer support do you get? Do you get partnership working? Is there people who support and donate you without a financial transaction which your service or organisation would not be possible to deliver their services if it wasn't there? So input is really, really important. You're all familiar with outputs. So what have you done as a result of that money coming in or that support coming in? That could be hours of time. That could be services delivered. That could be service users engaged. Very simple. And then you'll be very familiar with the outcomes. So what has changed as a result of your organisation? But if you pose that question throughout the whole context of what people look at and for everything that you communicate and challenge people to say, okay, what's changed? Actually, that language is embedded all the way through. And obviously, we need to look at the evidence. So outputs, very quickly then, we're into number of hours, service users engaged. Could be hits on websites. It could be workshops delivered, services delivered, volunteer hours. It can be a variety of things. But never miss them out, because people like to know the full story. Now, something critical here is think about what you're being commissioned for, if indeed you get any money from the public sector. Then think about what money you get from other sources, particularly funding or fundraising. That's money that you've helped generate, that you've secured to enhance what you deliver. Have you ever communicated that externally? Have you ever spoken to a commissioner and said, actually, we've got £100,000 worth of grants here, and we're delivering all this extra output? Because they may not know, because we probably never told them. So it's quite important there. So going back then to looking at what's changed. So what's changed could be many, many different things. But if we think about service users, think about 3 degrees. And I always say 3 degrees because it's quite simple. You think of that ripple effect. So you may have a primary change, so I may be healthier. Secondary change, I may be learning something. Third change is I may retain employment. So 3 different ripples, 3 degrees. So when you look at researching information, then we've already gone out and spoke to some stakeholders initially and found out what they value. The second time you need to go out, it can be different people, it doesn't have to be the same, but these are the type of people which would benefit from you speaking to, is asking those core questions. What's changed? How do we know it's changed? So what tends to happen quite often is you ask that question, perhaps to a focus group, online surveys, telephone interviews, one-to-ones, and you say, okay, we've delivered 14 hours worth of support for you. What's changed for you, Fred? And they'll come up with, well, I feel better. Yeah, I'm a bit more mobile. But what you need to understand is, okay, how could I define what that looks like? So if I'm more mobile, the evidence may be that I'm going shopping. Or I'm mobile, so I'm not using taxis so much. So what evidence is there that your outcomes are being delivered? And that's really essential, because without knowing that, the leap you have to then make to impact can be challenging. So going back, thinking of outputs, think of outcomes, and thinking where your themes lie. So it's thinking when you speak to somebody about employment, about housing, about education, and always having those themes in your back of your mind. So moving that conversation on then, from outcomes to impact, what we're looking at then is impact being the difference as a result of the outcome, i.e. the change happening. So what's the difference? So I feel better, great. If I'm still stuck at home watching Jeremy Kyle, actually not a lot's changed. But if I've joined the gym and I'm now exercising 3 days a week and I've lost weight, and I may then be at the reduced risk of a heart attack, or I may have dropped some BMI, and therefore my risk of having diabetes may have changed. So we've got to think about the difference, because the difference is where your impact and therefore your value is. And the word difference is quite simple, because everything has to have a difference. If you go to a training event, you may learn something, but unless you do something with that information and knowledge, there's no impact. Because anyone can do that. It's almost like having a happy sheet. So, has the food been good? Has the presenter been wow? Did you like the venue? Great, so what? Actually, what you want to know is you've left that training session, you've gone back to your organisation, and you've done something with it. And you never know, you've perhaps done something with it which has enabled you to do more or gain further support. That's where your impact is. So think about impact then. So take a service user, an hourly person. They say, well, actually, what's changed for me is I feel better. So improved health and well-being. Thinking of that impact again. Well, actually, my BMI is reduced, so I've lost a bit of weight, so I'm healthier that way. I've got improved cardiac fitness, so my heart is stronger. And I'm physically more mobile within the community. So I'm able to get about. So I'm more reliant on myself and less reliant on others. And that's really important, because if you're less reliant on others, public sector doesn't need to get involved so much. The risks of you needing urgent care reduce. So it makes it easier. So always think again of those 3 levels, 3 ripples, 3 degrees of impact. And then think, every time you have an impact, think about how you would evidence it. So, improve cardiac fitness, my chests are pumping. I'm not going to the doctor so much, because actually I don't need to. I don't need that urgent or crisis intervention, i.e. go to A&E, because I'm less likely to have a crisis. And actually I'm going to the gym. So I'm going 3 days a week and I'm burning calories. So always thinking of how you can evidence it, because people will challenge your claims. We can reduce those challenges by doing social pledges and social KVIs. We can do it by only measuring what's important, but we've got to be able to evidence that these changes and the difference the changes have made can be measured. So then thinking about how we can move it through and saying, okay, the impact could be cardiac fitness, so healthier heart. How do we know that? I'm not going to the GP as much because they've passed me fit and healthy. The value is I don't need a GP appointment. So I don't need the time a GP would need, 11.7 minutes. I don't need the cost. So I don't need that £43 spent on me. So if we see value as time and money on this context, it's quite easy. Because all we're doing is measuring what people tell us. Keeps on going back to that every step of the way. Then we need to think about a couple of things. So how long does it last? So very quickly, health doesn't last forever. Obviously, the more elderly you are, your health will naturally deteriorate. So you need to consider how long it may last. And you do that simply by research of health journals, leading professionals, leading organisations within your field, or ask people. So when you speak to commissioners and say, how long would you expect people to have or be healthier, they will tell you. So think about it in a computer sense. If you learn Windows 8 and Windows 10's just been launched, some of your knowledge needs to be updated. So if I've trained you last week on Windows 8, that knowledge may last you a year before you need Windows 10 installed. So that's quite simple to think about. Again, think about it on social value. What I'm telling you, or hopefully helping you today, will have probably a lifespan of about 3 years before new thinking comes out. Something else may overtake it. So you can claim what you do for a period of time. Then you think about other things, what would happen anyway. Well, actually, the government are doing a lot of things. Health and well-being, justice, education, employment. Tech's a little bit different because tech's evolving. So there tends to be very little associated with tech in terms of what would happen anyway. But there are certain things. So employment's hopefully reducing. But that's not because of you, that's because of all the other initiatives that are happening. So we need to consider that. So the fancy name is displacement, but I would just say what happens anyway. And then it's making it legitimate. So it's using or searching how and where information is to put a value to your claim. Now what I will do is send you over something which is called a unit cost database, which is a location of information of about 600 different financial costs assigned to certain government activities, which you'll find useful and actually remarkable as well, and it'll save you a lot of time. But then do consider how long things will take. But ask somebody, ask your service user how long. And actually what we're seeking to do throughout the whole social value agenda is one key thing, is how influential you are. So why not ask them? Why not ask them to rate you between 1 and 10 and say how influential. And if you're 2 and convert that over to a percentage, so 20%, you can claim 20% of all the value of that person, so all the impact and all the outcome. So this is how you would actually calculate the lovely world of social return on investment. And I've purposely not mentioned that until now because in many ways it's irrelevant. You still need to do the outcomes, indicators and impact for the vast majority of work. That effectively is known as the theory of change, and this is about how to calculate the theory of change. Very simple. The spreadsheet's out there to help you do that, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. Now the other key consideration is about where. So this is a quick win. This is dead simple. You have this information. Think about where money comes from. So we're saying about if you're based in Bristol and money's coming from Cardiff, that's new money into Bristol. So why not showcase that? Why not shout about it? If you've got funding from the big lottery, say, £10,000, that's new money that's been put into the local area. And actually there will be a benefit because you've run services, you've perhaps employed people, you've perhaps supported people, run additional support that you otherwise wouldn't have done. So you can showcase that. You know where you spend your money because you have your books, your financial book records. So think about all your suppliers. Think about where they're based. Think about how much money you spend on them and perhaps what their legal structure is. And then define how much would be in your local area. And if you consider local area to be very, very simple, the postcode of your local authority. So in Manchester, it's M, obviously, Birmingham B. So if you know that the money is being spent in the local economy, in a local authority area, you can shout about it. Also think about skills and knowledge development because you know how much you train staff, volunteers. You know how much you have to, so the mandatory training. You know how much would be considered mandatory in terms of health and safety, perhaps food hygiene, perhaps data protection. But think about all the stuff you don't have to do. So how much have you invested in time and money? This is something different that you've done, perhaps others haven't, so showcase it. And think how many jobs have been created and retained, whether it's an employment opportunity or a volunteer role. Very important in certain areas of the economy, certain areas within a location, particularly with areas of high unemployment. So quite key, simple things. So why you? Why engage you? And what have you spent and achieved locally? So quick wins, again, think about volunteer measurement. Think about very simply how many hours and the value of those hours. Value a volunteer's time, not based on an average, because I think that undervalues volunteers. Think about it on the role they undertake and what you would have to do and pay somebody for that role to be delivered if it was a paid position. Think about that supply chain, so think about where you spend your money, how much. Think about that mandatory and non-mandatory training that you deliver. Think about where your staff spend money. So there's an estimate that 60% of everything that a staff person, employee receives in income in their bank every month will retain locally. So that's actually important. So if you spend £1,000 a month on staff, £600 of that may stay locally. So therefore, they'll also be spending money on local suppliers, local organisations. They may spend money socialising, but all that money stays. And then use it to showcase your profile. Because if you've got your values, if you've got your social pledges and then got your KVIs, those are going to help you. And then stay in touch, because we have to read a lot. And by reading a lot, we actually digest a lot and hopefully then put it into some reduced format, so it's actually in summary. And then we actually send it out, whether through Twitter, whether we put it on news pages, and whether we have free events, etc. So keep in touch. And do remember one thing. Measure your values by understanding what your stakeholder values first, and only measure against that. That will save you 70% of your time. Only choose what model to use once you know what you're going to measure. And then when you do measure it, think about how. So last thing would be, when you write a report, one, think about the audience, but break it down. Break it down into those themes: health, education, employment, justice. So almost it's modular. So when you speak to a commissioner from public health, speak to them about health. Don't speak to them about justice, and vice versa. That will help you. And then use graphics, use infographics to showcase. 1 or 2 pages of images, visuals, which will shout. That's the secret of actually how we've unlocked £168 million for organisations. It's not rocket science, but it helps. So that's a very quick, comprehensive guide on social value. Hopefully you found it useful. Thank you for listening. And if you've got any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Well, thanks very much, Rich. That was really, really interesting, and you've really given us some skills and tools for our award winners and anyone listening to develop their social value so that you can showcase that to the stakeholders. So that was excellent. Thank you. We don't have any questions coming in yet. I think everybody must have been writing everything down and just taking all your advice. But I'd just like to pick up on a few things. As you said, it's so important to speak to stakeholders to find out what's important to them, because they have the power. So I think everybody can now develop their own key value indicators now, and so they'll be able to measure that. So that has been really useful. So if anybody has any questions for Rich, if you'd like to type them in now. Rich will send me the slides and any tools that he's mentioned in his presentation today. So, and they will be emailed out together with the YouTube link so that you can listen to this presentation again, because obviously there's a lot to take in from today's presentation. It's you've really shared your knowledge and expertise with us, so I'd like to thank you for that. So it doesn't look as if we're having any questions in. So as I say, I will send that to you over the next few days. So I'd just like to thank you for joining us for today's presentation, and I'd just like to thank you again, Rich, for your time and sharing your knowledge and skills with us today. So I will upload the presentation on our YouTube channel and forward it in the next couple of days. Oh, we just have a quick question from Rose. Is there somewhere good to start, worksheets or resources to start stakeholder mapping and creating pledges?
I will send some information over to you, Julie, that you can send out, which is a bit of a guide, and the worksheets will be attached. So I'm more than happy to send those out to you.
That's great. And will you, she said thank you very much. I think that's for answering a question and for today's presentation. And another good tool you mentioned was the unit cost database. You're going to send that over as well, haven't you?
I'm going to send that over. So that breaks down cost, gain, health, education, employment, justice, and has the source of information, the actual financial value attached to a certain event either happening or not happening. It's produced in partnership with a new economy and the Department of Local and Community Government. So it's a good, valid source as well. And I'll also send you over a link to the Social Value Global Exchange, which is a website born from a Wikipedia, which has about 1,000 or so outcomes, indicators, and impacts with people like myself who are uploading and sharing our knowledge, which will be helpful to you as well.
That's great, because they're really important to highlight in any documents that you're producing. So that's really relevant information and hard to find. So that's great to have it in one place. So that's great. So thanks again then, Rich. So I'd just like to tell all our listeners we are in the process of finalising our November and December webinars. The November webinar will be around marketing, and we have 2 webinars in December. One is around the sales process and one is around legal structures again. So please keep checking our website for further details. So I'd just like to wish you all a good afternoon, and thanks again, Rich, and goodbye to everybody.
Thanks very much indeed. Take care.